This morning, I'm going to hand things off to Kevin to introduce our guest and our topic. So, Kevin, it's yours.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Nick. And thank you for all of you. I am so thankful for your heart in ministry, in networking youth leaders. Uh, you are just amazing. So thank you for being here with us today. And Jordan, I'm excited to hear your story. I've heard and learned some about you. I know Bob Dunn's had a longer connection with you, but I just wanted to, learn more about you. What I've heard is you're an entrepreneur, curriculum writer. You are a licensed counselor, which is amazing. You also were an athlete in England, a college athlete, which just I love that. So many different aspects and perspectives. And then urban youth worker and doing all kinds of amazing things. So just can you share with me more of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Grateful to be with you guys. Like you said, my name is Jordan. I'm originally from Birmingham, England, born and raised. Uh, Moved to America when I was 18. Obviously, I'm a player of the real football, right? Not that hand egg stuff, but the real football. Yeah, the one that the rest of the world plays. Yep, that's me. So came to America, played soccer in college, became a believer my sophomore year in college.
Mm.
Um, Felt the call to ministry a few months later. And so for about the past decade and a half-ish, I've been in varying ministry capacities, and God kind of took me on this very sharp turn into the mental health world a few years ago. So I'm a licensed social counselor. Um, I'm actually in my office right now, actually, in Central Phoenix. So I have the privilege of serving families, young adults, teenagers, and I get a lot of people of color coming into the room, which is super cool.
Mm.
And so, yeah, man, it's been an interesting journey. Jumped into curriculum writing a few years ago. Had some friends who were kind of like, hey, you've been doing this thing on the ground called Real Talk, a nonprofit. We have open forum conversations in public high schools around culturally relevant topics and do our best to share biblical worldview. Felt like we'd figured something out. And so constantly kept prodding me to start writing content. I kept saying no. And then eventually God got to me when somebody from out of town came in who's very well respected and was like, hey, bro, start writing content. I was like, all right, God, cool, I'll do it. So been on that journey this is the fourth year. Partnered with Urban Youth Workers Institute out of California. So shout out to those guys. Been incredible help investing in us and just helping us continue to develop and grow what it is they're creating. But more specifically, writing things from the urban context. The world is becoming increasingly urban.
Mhm.
We would define urban as a culture of shared suffering. And so I'm sure that you guys are seeing youth everywhere that are experiencing suffering. And we're just trying to write content and resources that will engage those youth in a conversational approach, which we think is the best approach. I'm sure we'll get to that some,
Mm.
and share the gospel in a way that makes sense to them, so that they can like hear it and actually respond to it
Mm.
in the language that they speak. So, um, super grateful to be a part of what God's doing and to contribute to his kingdom in any way that I can. So thanks for having me here today.
Awesome. Very welcome for you to be here, and we're thankful that you are. And with that, just looking at teenagers today and looking at the vast changes we see in society that seem like it's just exponential change with social media and everything else. So, what can we do to remodel our ministries in healthy ways to keep the change the methods, but keep the message the same?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, at this point, I would say we're hanging our hat on the conversational method. And so we're all about creating space for dialogue around the issues that we're talking about, and then bringing it together with the authoritative truth of the word. That's kind of how we shape the content that we create. And so the reason why we think that is important is because we're dealing with a hyper individualized, hyper relativized group of people, right? Like we remember what it was like before the iPhone. We remember what it was like before social media. We remember what it was like to pick up a landline and call your friend after 7 p.m. because that's when it was free, or they call you back or whatever. Like I remember those things. They have no clue what that is. all they've had is a culture that has catered everything to them through their social media feed. And
Mm.
so, in the very same way, if the way that we're engaging them isn't as hyper relevant as what they're used to, they're going to check out. And so, the way that we do that is we have dialogue. And the reason for that is it allows them to bring something to the conversation. It
Mm.
allows them to have a piece of the pie, to have ownership, right? And then what happens is to actually listen to what we have to say in response. And part of that is because they feel like they've been heard. They feel like what they have to say has been valued, which is like the kind of spaces that they're used to being a part of. Like truth for them is social in nature. It's not authoritative. They don't get their understanding of what truth is from doctors, lawyers, professors, teachers, parents. That's why they're anti-institutional and anti-establishment. They don't like people in positions of authority because by nature of design of what they've been fed by, it's not that way. Like they get to control the narrative through their feed, right? And so we bring them into a situation where it's more about the community. It's more about discerning what truth is and discovering it together. And now, obviously, we know what the truth is. We know who Jesus is. And we're confident that if kids are actually genuinely open to discovering truth, they're going to be led to the truth, which is Christ, right? And so, in that environment, obviously, we're presenting that as the authoritative truth. But what we found is in that type of environment, kids tend to respond better. Um, I mean, we can have really cool things, we can do really cool things, we can put on really cool events. But the reality is there are always people out there who can do more, spend more, speak better, put on a better production. And so what is it that we actually have to give students? Ourselves, presence,
Mm.
a hand on the shoulder, look in the eyes, a question followed by space for them to actually answer and feel heard. And so I think if we'll do that, which I actually think is something that is drastically missing from the world they live in because they live in technology, they'll experience something that's different, transformative, and they'll stick around, whether that's in a group of 10 kids or 1,000 kids. And so that's that's kind of like what we're hanging our hat on in terms of having dialogue and having conversation with people. And we found that in that space, there's some really cool moments that happen in terms of sharing the gospel. I'll give you an example of one. We were having a conversation about abortion on one of the high school campuses that we do ministry on. And this girl, she says, um, I consider it a mercy to kill my child if I knew that they were going to be raised in the same environment that I was going to be raised in. And then she turned and she looked at us and said, I don't have anywhere else to say things like this. And I'm so glad that you guys are here.
Mm. Wow.
And so those are the kind of spaces that we need to create. And those are the kind of conversations that need to be able to be had, like in our youth ministries, I would argue, not just on the high school campuses too. Um, Probably one of my crowning moments as a youth pastor is having a conversation about the Great Commission. And this girl who's coming, she's an atheist at this point. She, in the middle of the conversation, she's like, I just want you guys to know I'm not even sure I believe all this stuff yet. But like, I'm so glad to be here and I'm grateful that you guys have taken me in and I'm grateful that I can ask questions here and they get answered.
That's
And then
awesome.
nobody in the youth group batted an eye. Nobody acted like she was crazy. Everybody's like, cool, we're glad you're here. We just kept on talking. And then that same day, she came to me and said, hey, what do you think about me doing DMT? And I'm like, cool. Well, let's talk about why you want to do DMT. He's like, well, I've heard it helps you have experiences with God. I'm like, oh, so you want to experience God?
Mm.
God's crying. I'm like, well, for the Christian, we use this thing called prayer. So why don't we try prayer first? We'll get to DMT later. Right. And so like, but these are the kind of spaces and these are the kind of conversation. I think these are the ways that we need to engage. Um, a DMT is a psychedelic, but it's like a way that you can, it's hallucinogenic. So think about like ayahuasca or something like that. Like it's in that kind of camp. Um, so yeah, I think like spaces like that, conversations like that, um, are what's necessary. I think with this generation to engage them and see them transformed by the gospel.
That is so amazing. In what spaces have you, what spaces have you been able to create in working with teenagers? Because it sounds like you're on campus and have some kind of a uh, a ministry outside of campus. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so that's Real Talk. Real Talk is a space that we create on high school campuses for open forum conversation around culturally relevant topics. We talk about the things that kids want to talk about, the controversial things. We ask them questions and we give space for them to respond, to share how they feel, how they think, what they believe about it, even if it's wrong. Um, we're okay with that. And so, like, the only rule we really is like, hey, be respectful of one another. Like, think about the people in the room as you're communicating the things that you're communicating, and communicate in a way that's respectful to everybody. Um, we want them to share what they really think. We want them to share what they really feel. Um, and creating this space where they can really be honest and really bring like the true things that they think and feel to the surface. And then what we do is like spend time listening, spend time asking more questions. And then at the end, what we'll do is we'll tie the conversation together with some sort of biblical wisdom or truth for kids to kind of like hear as like breadcrumbs, if you will. Like I can't tell you how many times I've heard, we'll be like, hey, ancient wisdom says a man without self-control is like a city without walls. And the kids will be like, oh, bro, that's crazy. Like I was about to like fight somebody before I came in this room. That's so true. You know what I mean? And so just point into like the text as like a place for them to get truth, to get wisdom, to get understanding. Um, we've just found that that's a very fruitful way to engage them. Like once again, when you kind of create space for them to share, for them to think, for them to feel, for them to question, and then say like, hey, like here's how we've come to understand this issue. And like this, we feel like is the way to make the most sense of this. Like for me, when I present Christianity, I'm presenting it as like, you should just believe in Jesus. Like to me, it's the only way to understand reality. The world doesn't make sense without the gospel at all, at all. And so like when I'm presenting it, that's how I want to present it. Like, yo, this is the way we make sense of our existence. This is the way we make sense of the world that we live in and why it is the way that it is and why I am the way that I am and what will I become and what can I become and what choices do I have to make. And so I think when you present it in that stream in that way, there's some really cool things that can happen.
So true, so amazing. The idea of listening, bringing back to the ancient wisdom, the ancient texts. I love the conversational method. With that, in looking, all of us are about collaboration when it comes to youth ministry. How do we work together better? And how do we network? Kind of looking at networking and navigating changes. When it comes to networking with other youth leaders, how might we need to change our paradigms?
Yeah, that's a good one. So for you guys as like network leaders, as I think about it myself, as somebody who's like kind of like after the same audience as you, like engaging youth workers, right? Youth leaders, equipping them, training them. I think the biggest thing you can do is add value. And so they're looking for content, they're looking for resources, they're looking for answers, they're looking for ways to improve what they do, grow in what they do, be challenged in what they do, be encouraged in what they do. And so how can you add value? Like one of the things we do as a company is every other week, we call it In the Trenches. And it's just a bi-weekly newsletter that we send out where we basically send them a ton of different content, podcasts, blog articles. If we're giving away content, we'll drop it in there so they can go grab it. And the whole goal is just to add value to them and say, hey, like, we see the work that you're doing. Here are some things that we think if you take a couple minutes to read these, will benefit your ministry, will help you grow in what you're trying to do. And so I think like when we think about like networks and when we think about businesses or whatever in this day and age, like, or even when we think about youth ministry, for example, I think the way that we have to think about it changes a little bit. Like, I think we've centralized a lot of like our work around like a meeting, right? Like, okay, we're getting this many people to show up to this weekly meeting or monthly meeting or bi-weekly. And I think it should much more be about like footprint, right? So, for example, for a youth pastor, I'm always telling them like, yo, if you're on campus, count the kids that are coming to your on-campus meetings as kids that are attending church.
Hmm.
Why wouldn't you? Because they didn't show up to a building? They're showing up and you're sharing the gospel with them.
Mhm.
Like why? So like in the same way, like for you guys, like, hey, if you let's say you're in a certain region, you know, my boy Phil's in Washington, right? So he starts the youth, the youth ministry network of Washington, um, like newsletter, right? And all he does is he compiles all the stuff that's relevant to Washington for
Hmm.
youth workers, and he pushes that out in a biweekly or weekly newsletter to youth
Okay.
workers. He's just like, hey, this is a freebie. I just want to invest in your ministry. Here's everything that's going on in your state. It's going to be a ton of value to these cats. And why would you not count that as engagement?
Hmm.
You're engaging these guys, adding value to them. And it's like you can, like, hey, if you want to meet up with us, we're here. If you want to jump on the Zoom, we're here. But if you don't, like, here's just some value because we love you, we care about you, we want you to be successful in ministry, whether I ever meet you face to face or not.
Hmm.
And so I think we can take advantage of some of the things that technology allows us to do that we just simply couldn't do before. It allows us to like have a far more reach and footprint and be way more effective. And we can track different metrics. So I would track the open rate, I would track the click rates, who's open, who's clicking, who's engaging with the content. And then it might be a situation where it's like you see that there's 10 or 20 guys that are like consistently engaging with your stuff, but you've never met them. Be a good time to reach out to them because the data is telling you they're interested in your stuff. So it's like, hey, now I'm going to reach out by phone. I'm going to reach out by email and be like, hey, man, I noticed that you've been like paying attention to this. I'd love to connect with you. Going to be way more open to it at that point. So I think there's things that we can do to like um, grow our networks, if you will, or grow our influence.
Hmm.
And then also like think about our footprint and our effectiveness in ministry in different ways than perhaps we thought about in the past.
I love it. That's just amazing, Jordan. Thank you. Um, we're going to take some time from there to go into groups to talk and discuss, um, hearing more. And Jordan, you'll be in one of those groups. So some of you all have the pleasure of having him be a part of the group that you're in. But I'm going to turn it over to Dan Bergstrom.
Yeah, so we are going to post these questions in the chat so you can pick those up and keep track of them, cut and paste them, or whatever you need to do. But there's four things that some good prompts to talk about. The first one would be, how do you go about navigating change in your ministry? Does it work well for you? Maybe it doesn't, but share the ways that you approach change in your ministry. Second would be, how can you create change through collaboration, and how can your network help with that? And instead of just going it alone, what can you collaborate on? Third thing would be, what are other voices that need to be involved in creating effective change in your ministry? Again, not going it by yourself, but who else needs to speak into what's going on and the change that you want to bring? And the fourth thing we want to prompt you with is, what changes could be helpful in fostering collaboration in your network and building more of that into your network meetings. So we got those. We're going to get those four things in the chat coming up there. Yes, there they are. Kevin posted them. So have some great conversation. May God direct it.
Feel free to pause the video here and think through these questions yourself, or with the group that you're viewing this with. When you're ready, unpause to hear more of the conversation and the takeaways from the youth workers that joined us live.
I don't know about the rest of you guys. We had some great conversation in our group. So excited to, I learned some things. Literally, it was great. I just learned some key stuff from Isaac. So curious, what are the golden nuggets that cropped up in your conversation?
I'm going to put somebody on the spot. Christina, you had some amazing things to say on navigating change, moving from Reno, Nevada over to New York City.
Yeah, sure. I was gonna say my life has been all about change, is what I was sharing, personally. But and we also talked about COVID and its impact and having us change. And so one of the realities, besides my own personal life and changing, is coming to New York, is that we're seeing a beautiful growth in new people rising up to ministry. So my primary role is actually serving leaders of leaders. So I'm witnessing this happen across New York, which is very, very interesting and exciting. But that means also that I'm finding that within the way and the way I've experienced gatherings with youth ministry leaders before looks different. So I'm doing a lot more one-on-one mentoring than group gatherings. And when I do gather in group gatherings, I'm keeping them very gospel centered, really using the Acts 2:42 as a model, where we gather together, we break bread, we fellowship together, but we're also being formed together in the word. And I'm finding some fruit in that with small groups of leaders. So that's kind of what's exciting for me within change.
Isaac, would you share about how you do your staff meetings and brainstorming and change, what you were sharing?
Yeah, I was just talking about how I used to be kind of the type of person that would just kind of lead all the change and say, "Hey guys, we're going to do this and we're going to do that." And I think it was because I used to have more just people that would say, "Okay, just tell me what to do." But I've learned that when you have leaders that are with you for a few years, they have longevity. A lot of those leaders want to speak up and speak into the programming and the events, and what if we did this, or what do you think about this, or even bring up concerns. Um, so what I started doing is, as much as we try to collaborate in our leader meetings before youth group, um, there wasn't enough time to do it there. And so what I started doing was, I would say, hey, if you want to be part of programming this or leading this or designing this event, let's meet separately. But if you don't want to be, and you just want to show up to the event and be told what to do and just help out at the event, that's totally fine too. So I kind of gave people the permission, if they want to be more involved and speak into something, we'll have more of a brainstorming meeting or a time together. And sometimes it might be just after youth group or another time, or they can just show up to the meeting and be told what to do. And we told them that we would update them on what we decide and things like that. So I think it just allowed for those people that just want to be told what to do and just want to show up and help at the event to do that. But the ones that kind of have ideas or maybe are a little bit more bought in or a little bit more passionate about a certain side of things, it lets them have their voice
Yeah.
and speak into things, and then I just kind of lead that meeting with the church perspective, if we can do that or not do that or whatever. But for the most part, it's a lot of collaboration. It's really cool.
Awesome. Who else? Nuggets. Good stuff.
Just as the breakout room ended, Stan and I was chatting with Stan about how my latest reflection and introspection, I'm an introvert by pure blood. And so that's both a blessing and a curse. I know that. But just to not be complacent. I've been in my current ministry for 15 years at St. Anne Parish, Wausau, Wisconsin. My desk literally just moved from that corner of the office to that corner of the office during the pandemic because we got new furniture, but it's the biggest change of that area. But my point is that to not just pull out the same file over and over again and change the dates only of my confirmation retreat letter to the parents of the packing list that I just did before today's call, but to see that as an opportunity for renewal revision in the process, and to um, not to be complacent, resting on my laurels, because at the same time, too, 15 years, these kids, 15 years old, I've known them since their baptism and their experience, and been seeing them grow since then. And that's a pure gift for me, too, that I know those who I know that well. Or at the same time, on the flip side of that coin, I should have known them for 15 years, though I have not, even though they've been around the place for 15 years. And that's just a kick in the pants like, John, why don't you know that kid by name, even though they've been part of the parish for 15 years? Which then speaks to me of the need for more networking and within my own church setting. That I can't be the minister to everyone, but the minister of ministers, and that's where I need to see that grow in my own church setting, or want to see that grow in my own church setting. So conversations like this help me kick that in gear. Thank you, folks.
So what's your takeaway from the from what Jordan said, from your conversation, your small group? Have you heard the Lord speak to you and challenge you on something, or encourage you on something that you need to pack up and put into practice today?
Something I've tried to get in the habit of doing is encourage questions, like what the fellow earlier was talking about wrestling with tough questions and having a open space to do that. And I guess the challenge with all that is to be prepared to answer with the truth, and lead them to discover that truth too. Don't shy away from the tough questions, especially young men and ladies that are coming from tough home situations. I've got a good bit of that at our off-campus small groups that we do. A lot of neighborhood kids that live right next to that middle school that walk home from there, and I know they're coming from low income, typically fatherless homes, and just trying to give them some sort of hope, and give them point them to Jesus, that with that hope. So if anyone's got strategies on how to lead in those conversations, and I think for me some of the best things have been is just not knowing that I'm not going to win them over immediately, like that they have a wall of trust up, or a wall that prevents them from trusting up. So it just takes a whole lot of time and a whole lot of grace to be ready to do that, and just educate our other volunteer leaders that these kids are going to be hard, and it's okay, and this is why they're hard.
Hey, Dan, I think the thing that popped out to me as I was hearing Jordan talk, I was wondering, Jordan, maybe I had a question. When you're talking about tying things together, do you plan and prepare a lesson ahead of time, and you're kind of guiding the conversation along the way? Or are you just constantly listening to the Holy Spirit and something just pops in your mind and that's the direction that you want to go? Because I know you talked about curriculum, but how does that kind of work for you?
Yeah. So for me personally, yes to both. But in terms of, but that's just because I've been doing it for a really long time. And so sometimes I go into a conversation with something planned. Hey, we got this topic. And then kids is like, nah, bro, we trying to talk about this. I'm like, all right, say less. Let's talk about that then. And we just go with where that takes us. And while I'm listening to them, I'm kind of formulating a biblical response in my mind, like of where I want to go. And a lot of times it's like, all right, God, you're going to have to lead me on this one. It's like, show me. And so, but yeah, on the flip side of that, in terms of preparation, we go in with something prepared. And then obviously with the curriculum piece, like that is what we've shaped to Reframe around. So the curriculum company, Reframe Youth, is all around, like, we're building content and resources, specifically engaging the conversational method. So we're creating series like youth ministry curriculum companies do out there, but we're shaping them more specifically around engaging in conversations. And so we'll start with questions around like an opening story. And the reason we do that is we want to lead into things that we want kids to respond in, right? So we want kids to be vulnerable. We want them to tell us what's really going on in their lives, but then we don't tell them anything. So like we want them to be vulnerable with us without bidding any vulnerability towards them. And so we want to like kind of start fostering those things in the context of the youth group, fostering vulnerability, fostering compassion, fostering trust. So that's the story piece, then the questions that tie out the story. And then we want them to start thinking about the text. So we'll take a piece of text in context, have them have conversation about that, and then we'll present like, oh, well, here's the truth, the authoritative truth of the scripture, so to speak. So that's usually how we approach it in that sense. Like on campus, it's just a bunch of questions, creating space for students to respond, and then we'll give them a biblical response at the end. But yeah, we just found like that it's just been a really fruitful way to engage and to build relationship, build trust, and share the gospel and sow seeds, man, and see really cool responses.
In any given meeting, do you have a handful of questions? How long I'm thinking logistics now, and if this is too much and you're like, hey, you just got to buy the curriculum, that's fine. But like if there's a space where you're planning a time to gather, how much time is actually engaging in questions, and how much time do you have? Because the typical youth pastor is like, I've got 20 minutes to preach or to teach. How do you kind of build how is the curriculum kind of built to help guide a meeting and not let it fall off the wheels?
Yeah, for sure. So if I had 20 minutes, we stack a ton of questions in there. There's usually like there might be 5 or 6 per section, and then we've got like the little piece of authoritative truth as it pertains to the text that we're engaging that you're going to communicate to your young people. So I would say that only takes a couple of minutes. And the reason I say it only takes a couple of minutes is because like you had this conversation, they've been bought into it. There's probably some cool pieces that have come up in the midst of that conversation anyways. And then you get to tie it all together with this biblical truth that you have their full attention as you communicate it, right? Because everybody has ownership in the conversation. And so I think there's a ton of value in communicating a powerful piece of truth in 5 or 6 minutes than there is talking for 20 and most of your kids aren't listening to you. And so yeah, I would say like that's how, if I had 20 minutes, I'm going to spend 15 minutes talking to 18 minutes talking, and I'm going to spend 2 minutes delivering like the truth of what needs to be delivered. And that's going to be the thing that we leave with. And then obviously we want to, usually what we do is we drive them into small groups as well after that for further conversation and reflection. But so we want the scriptures to have the last, right? But it doesn't have to like be the whole word, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so do you know like a specific size group that this works specifically with, like up to a certain number? Are you driving questions?
It works with any size. I think like, people would assume that you can only do this with small groups. I mean, we've had open forum conversations with 500 people in the room.
Wow.
It just takes a little bit more design and intentionality. There's ways to like make sure that everybody feels brought into the conversation. You can have a small group. If you had 500 kids in the room, you could have, small groups of, let's say 10 to 15 kids. And then there's a representative from each small group that, if they've got something really cool to say, you put them on the mic. So everybody across the auditorium hears that. And then that fosters further conversation, drive it back into the small group, drive it out again, drive it back into the small group. And so there's a way to have the big conversation and the small conversation. It's just going to take a little bit more planning and facilitation to do that in your context, but that's going to be way more effective than just you talking and assuming that these kids are actually listening to what you have to say. And the cool thing about it is when you listen to them and they're giving you their feedback, they're answering these questions, they're telling you how they need to hear the gospel.
That's good.
They're giving you the answer. Like, here's my problem. I don't have to guess. You get what I'm saying? Like, we're making our job a whole lot easier when we ask some questions and get some answers first.
Amen.
Right?
Awesome.
Yep.
Jordan, thank you. And thank you all for the amazing discussion, for the incredible ideas. And I've got a lot that I need to process personally. But we are almost out of time, forgive me of that, but we want to end on time. And looking at that, just a couple things. we have something called free refills that we have. You can take a look. We'll have a follow-up email that has all these resources in it for you. Also, we'll have a recording of this conversation so you can take a look at it. We'll be sticking around for a little time afterwards just to be able to share more if you want. Don't feel bad if you have to leave. With that, then next month, we're also going to have a time with Robert Purvey from 10 by 10 talking about growing deeper, looking at discipleship in deeper ways, both for youth leaders and for the students that you are working with. How do we grow deeper as we're navigating change in ministry and life? So with that, let me go ahead and pray. That's an incredible value for all of our networks and conversations. So let me go ahead and pray for us. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for Jordan, for his heart and his passion for being able to reach teenagers and being able to see the way that it's so valuable to add value to others. Thank you, God, for each individual here. Pray that as we navigate change in our lives, we trust and depend on you and get wisdom and advice as we learn in humility. We praise you, honor, and glorify you. Amen.
Thanks for viewing this network conversation, brought to you by the National Network of Youth Ministries. We hope it helps you to set the table for unity and further conversations with other youth leaders. Any shared links are in the comment section on NNYM's YouTube channel. While you're there, feel free to like and subscribe. If you want to join our next conversation or training, you can find upcoming live events on our Eventbrite page. You can also connect to a local network leader at nnym.org. We're here because we are better together.